Now two souls are fiercely entangled.
Okay, that was neat. Anyway, the final bosses. What, did you expect a long speech about Inferno and the others? They're final bosses, so I'll spare my breath and get right to ranking them from worst to best. Sorry for the cranky intro, I had 2 scrap videos that didn't work out. Starting with the lowest, Elysium in Soul Calibur 5. She's basically a Diet Inferno. She only uses the movesets from the female cast. Half the impact, half the effort. Story-wise, Elysium was just a surprise, this holy sword is evil too! I've always hated that twist because it's just a lousy excuse to put in a gray area. It had some hints in Soul Calibur 4, but it's still dumb. At least her fight isn't too bad as a final boss, but she can still be wrung out in her own stage in the later rounds. Everything else, she's a poor imitation of Sophitia, not Patroclus. Boring less thought villain, except for her looks. Look at her eyes, if you can. Speaking of Inferno, his appearance in Soul Calibur 1 was nothing special compared to Soul Edge. He's just another variation of Edgemaster but with additional moves. The biggest problem with Inferno here is that you can ring him out easily. Since all the stages are open, anyone can be wrung out. And ring outs are easy to do in this game. On higher difficulties, trying to get him near the edge takes some effort, yet it's still possible. He's also playable, well, sort of. You instead play as Cinder from Killer Instinct, or Pepsi Man, Lava Man. Yeah, you play as a Lava Man hybrid. Also, he is a joke in the arcade version. You fight Gro as the final boss in Libera Soul. After he turns his hair red, he disappears until after you beat Aswell. Compared to Aswell, it's not as impactful. At least he was more difficult than Aswell. The fight itself, you fight him charged permanently. That's about it. Even without using food, it's not as difficult as you think. As the final boss for this mode, it's disappointing. I think it should have been the other way around, fight Soul Charged Gro and then Aswell in his full power mode. I'm adding Soul Calibur Legends again for this list. The bosses in that game are a mixed bag. Some are pretty decent, but most just repeat themselves. The final battle against the Emperor and Iska aren't as weak. Yet again, the targeting and nunchuck controls are more of a hindrance than the bosses themselves. Heck, the game is more of a liability than the bosses. The first part, Sister Emperor, is rough. Most of the time she fires projectiles and lasers, and like most boss fights, you can only hurt her after certain attacks, otherwise you get guard impacted without any warning. That while the stage being cramped and there are no healing potions around. Iska's fight is a little better. At least you can deflect his projectiles. The battle itself can get annoying with his cloning and laser beams. I struggle with this fight mostly because of the unblockable attacks he does. Why have the ability to block when most attacks are unblockables in the first place? No healing potions here too, by the way. Most of the time he flies around. Iska's patterns are more noticeable than the Emperor's. Both of them are better than the previous bosses. Yes, I even would rather fight Iska than have a rematch against Discount Raytheon the third time. As for Strife, he puts up a better fight. For his advantage, not you. Strife's health is notoriously high. Even worse, he uses Soul Edge, one of the most overpowered legendary weapons in the game. One hit heals plenty of his lost HP. Your few hopes of defeating him is to rely on ringing him out and waiting for his HP to sap. I wish. What I really meant to say was use either weapons that heal you or use legendary weapons. Don't worry, you can still ring him out. They deal lots of damage anyway. The fights before him are also rough, and let me remind you that there are no strongholds to rest, so once your unit is gone, they're gone. I always switch back to infantry to auto-battle the guards because I didn't want to deal with them in the first place. Even trying to cheese him, he's a painful final boss to go against. One of the most frustrating final bosses in a series, which is also mid. Speaking of frustration, Cervantes' debut in Soul Edge, and Inferno when he was called Soul Edge. Fighting Cervantes is like fighting Kazuya Mishima in Tekken 2. Both of them are notorious for reading your inputs every time you press a button, even worse in the arcade versions. They also throw spam, and their powered up forms are just as nasty. Cervantes is worse in his base form because he's unpredictable. You never know what move he'll use. Soul Edge is pretty much a powered up Cervantes, unsurprisingly. Like Devil, he does have some additional moves, but you don't see them often. Expect him to throw you as well. Both of them are effective as bosses regardless of their difficulty. Inferno got a redesign in Soul Calibur 6, which is fucking badass. Before he was a fire guy, but here, he looks like a demon. My only nitpick about him is that he's just a powered up version of Nightmare. Since there are no mimic characters, he can't copy anyone else's moveset. Say what you want about Nightmare, but people often forget that Inferno is much worse to fight against. At least you can't play as him online legit. I would talk about that fight in Libero Soul, but I'd rather not cuss like I'm in Casino. In other modes, he puts up a good fight. For him, not you. He gets crazy with his moves. He deals even more damage than Nightmare and spam throws. The worst he can do is combos. Inferno sweats combos more often than even throwing you. You thought that was bad? Like I said, he's even worse in Libero Soul. Fucking don't say that! Sorry, my bad. Speaking of powered up forms again, Zosima has evolved into Abyss, Adamant Nature with higher— oh wait, wrong game. Same deal as before, reading inputs and throwing often. This time he shoots projectiles and sucks you like a vacuum. For a different final boss since Inferno, it's a step up. His design is also scary looking. The ruined stage and music is also a good touch. He can get wrung out if you're tired of his cheap tactics. Good luck trying to do that anyway. Despite the difficulty, Abyss is one of the better final bosses out there. Inferno was at his best in Soul Calibur 2. His battle was much improved over the previous game. Remember ringing him out? Not this time. His stage is now infinite. Inferno fights the same way as before, mimicking the roster, but he changes it up when you take off a portion of his health. His AI is also a step up. It's not as bad as Abyss and Cervantes. Okay. Alright, yeah, he can still clap your cheeks. The design for Inferno is a little better, but not as much as 6's design. The music is the best part of the fight. It just screams final boss and it's epic. This was the best Inferno boss fight by far. Algol is an underrated final boss. Instead of fighting a demon, you fight a god. Instead of being a mimic or a powered up version, his moveset is unique in a crazy way. He summons both Soul Edge and Calibur out of his hands, shoots slow projectiles, and teleports with his chair. He can be challenging, but not as hard as the other bosses. Unless you fight him in Tower of Lost Souls, he's one of the many reasons why I have mixed feelings about that mode. In story mode, he can be hard, but most of the time he's manageable. You can't ring him out because of his boss effects. The only time you could do that is through arcade and versus. He's not too different in Broken Destiny. The gameplay in that game is vanilla besides the trial and error story mode. The fight with Algol is the only fight in that story mode where you fight him normally, even though he starts off using certain moves on each round. Special mentions because I forgot to add them in the first place. Siegfried and Nightmare, you still fight them the same way as before, but they got more special effects. And just like Algol, you can't ring them out. Nightmare drains your health and rings you out often, and Siegfried chips your guard. Both are not as bad as Algol, although Nightmare is more annoying to fight against. As well, on the first encounter he can be pretty tough because all you need to do is take a portion of his health and then that's it. His second fight where you fight him for real, well, it's not as hard as you think. Even without using items and you're lower leveled, you can still put up a fight better than he can. I have a gut feeling that people are going to ask about Aswell, so that's why I'm mentioning him here. Like I said, Grow is the final boss, not Aswell. Abyss wasn't the only final boss in Soul Calibur 3. Night Terror can be fought in Tales of Souls through a specific path. Every character has a different path to face him. The reason why I regard Night Terror the highest is the mystery factor. He's the Shinakuma of Soul Calibur. Getting there is the harder part. The opponents you face vary depending on who you play as. The path also takes you to the Grand Labyrinth, where you have to face Okadan. Guess what? He's hard too. But enough about those guys. Night Terror itself is what you expect. Nightmare on steroids, stronger than even Soul Calibur 6 Inferno. His AI is tough. He attacks faster than you realize despite his huge size. Oh, and he lasers you too. Don't even think about ringing him out because he's got wings for a reason. Oh, you think he's hard enough in Tales of Souls? Well, what if I were to tell you that his mission battle is even harder, even on easy difficulty? On higher difficulties his health is increased. Take what I said about earlier about his AI, but multiply it a bunch. If he proves too much for you, well, you could always play as Sophitia. Whew, man. These bosses were just as rough as writing the script for this video. Still, another requested video, another done deal. Do you agree with the video or otherwise? The legend will never—
Hey, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of my stuff, subscribe and hit the bell. Okay, thanks, bye.